we need a full investigation into the FBI. Would that be something that you would support?
Yes, but I think I have gained enough of an understanding of the FBI such that I can confidently say the correct answer is not to give them some new building or anything else. It is not to replace Christopher Wray, which is just a fake mirage. Get Christopher Wray out, you get James Comey 2.0. I'm convinced the right answer is to shut down the failed Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. That's the only answer that remains. And I actually think you guys are, playing almost nicer with respect to the facts that we do have. As I said, I agree that it appears to be an inside job, but we don't really know the full extent of what happened. I will say, though, it's interesting. I don't know if you guys have talked about this in the show before. I've kind of gone deep on this because I think it's important, not just for this incident, but for the future of the country. You know who the Detroit field office head was at the time of the alleged Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot? Are you guys, is this something you've talked about before or not really?
I think we have, but take it away.
Yeah, so this is important, though, to understand the nexus. It's kind of an underbelly in our law enforcement. So the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot actually began as a plot to storm the Capitol in the state of Michigan. And you know how it started was people at the FBI putting people up to this. Poor guys. One of them was actually supposedly getting hot water from a Mexican restaurant across the street. These are people who are not doing well in their life, who they've put up and cultivated with $5,000 credit cards with $5,000 limits to go buy munitions and otherwise, to initially what began as a plot to storm the Capitol, but eventually ended up being a plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. A good number of the people who were captured here, like we're talking about a high proportion of them were absolutely federal informants. And yet the Detroit field office head, and they took that all the way to trial, several of the people at trial were acquitted on grounds of entrapment. One of the jurors at the end went to one of the defendants, just gave him a hug and apologized for what he had been through because the juror actually had to see what the FBI put these people up to. And you can't make this stuff up. In October of 2020, 3 months before January of 2021, guess who gets a promotion to be the D.C. field office head? Was none other than that Detroit field office head. And what do you have on January 6, 2021, 3 months later, is a storming of the U.S. Capitol. So there's a lot here that suggests, the D.C. pipe bomb story at the DNC and the RNC headquarters. Why haven't we heard the first thing about what we actually know, despite the existence of video footage about that, and the careful coincidence of exactly when that pipe bomb at the RNC headquarters happened to have been discovered with the timer on it down to the time where the actual vote was supposed to be cast for certifying the results of the election.
It's just an impossibility. That was the number one thing for me. The day after, and sorry to cut you off, but the day after January 6th, I was like, this is it's complete setup by the FBI. If you mean to tell me that I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, a couple of blocks away from the White House when January 6th happened. It was a very bizarre day because we had an entire summer of people rioting. It was scary to go outside. I was pregnant at the time. Cars set on fire. Every day there was a crazy protest, people storming buildings at all times. Suddenly, after the Summer of Love BLM, we were getting phone calls, people asking if we were okay after January 6th when there wasn't any sounds outside of where I lived. If you mean to tell me that in Washington, D.C., where you can't walk 2 feet, it is the most surveilled building in the world, okay? That a couple of blocks away from the White House, they can't figure out where there, again, cameras on every single corner, every inch, who got out of their car, placed pipe bombs at the RNC and the DNC headquarters, and went away. And let me tell you how extensive their search was, because this is something that people are not talking about, because you're talking about people that stood trial, and of course, that's the most important, the people that are being locked up, people that have committed suicide. Let's not forget to talk about people that have killed themselves for fear of being locked up because they showed up to support the sitting president of the United States. I have 2 friends from Stamford, Connecticut, who showed up to hear Donald Trump speak and went home, okay? That was it. They never went into the Capitol building, nothing. After the speech, they didn't go up. FBI agents showed up at their house. This was a harassment and intimidation campaign that took place. If you even showed up to support President Trump, they got questioned. They found a picture of them on Facebook with a MAGA flag. They heard Trump speak and they went home, and these people were questioned by the feds. So they had enough resources, right, to send them out and hunt down people that were posting pictures, but they can't find out who just tried to blow up headquarters in Washington, D.C., a couple of blocks away from the White House.
And you want to know what the weirdest part about this is? And I'm just, as I go deeper, learning facts about this, is Kamala Harris, the number 2, for better or worse, to succeed the U.S. president, was at the DNC headquarters that morning. With all, the level of security there, that understand, then suddenly, randomly, they just see it on a park bench later. So I think there's enough facts here to know the government has not been transparent with us. But furthermore, we know Capitol Police officers let him in. We know that the video footage was selectively released such that you did not see shooting rubber bullets and tear gas into the mostly peaceful crowd. You saw the reaction of those people hitting the Capitol after releasing that, and then you did not see initially Capitol Police officers allowing people in peacefully. It's a distortion, and we just deserve the truth.
Well, I have a question for you. So I've often talked about the May 29th insurrection. May 29th, 2020, thousands of far-left extremists stormed the barricades of the White House, fought with hundreds, if not several hundred police officers, injuring around between 70 and 140. They firebombed the White House grounds. That's true. They set fire to a guard tower, and they set fire to St. John's Church. This is a historical church the Founding Fathers would go to. It was so severe that the president was forced into his emergency bunker, thus disrupting his official duties. And
really?
Yes.
Wow.
And my question is, where was our commission? Where was the photos of that day when, I go to family gatherings over the holidays and I show a photo of an aerial shot of DC, which many of you may have seen, smoke rising out all around the White House and the surrounding areas from fires that were being lit. Mm-hmm. The president was forced into an emergency bunker against his will, and the media made fun of him and called him Bunker Boy for having had to experience this. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump said, I went down, they showed me it, he clearly didn't want to be there. When law enforcement then cleared out the extremists who had laid siege to the White House, I'm being purposefully hyperbolic, you understand why, Donald Trump came out the next day and took a picture, and they attacked him and insulted him for having defended the White House and a church that was set on fire by an extremist faction. A faction so extreme, in fact, that similar groups and cells within the same ideology had seized several blocks in various cities. In Atlanta, in Seattle, in their Capitol Hill occupation, and in Minnesota with George Floyd Square. Yeah. Videos emerged out of, I believe it was Seattle, of armed groups walking around with AR-15s, pointing them at drivers. People of a similar or same ideology, in fact, many of these people do coordinate, engaged in insurrection. Now, of course, we can calm down and say a bunch of extremist activists rioting in the streets, no insurrection. Oh, fair point. Then neither was the Capitol.
Well, what about Brett Kavanaugh? Was anybody alive for the Brett Kavanaugh hearings? Do you remember them storming in, going into senators' offices? I'm telling you, D.C. was insane, and nobody cared until January 6th happened. This was like a routine thing that was happening to get their ideas across. They were doing sit-ins. They were walking in, in the halls uninvited. They couldn't get these people out. I mean, it's just crazy to think that suddenly they focused on January 6th, and it's hard to imagine that the feds were not in on it when we know we have all of these pieces of footage.
Right. And at the very least, one thing, because I think there's two strands here. Both are interesting. I think there's two different points, and both are interesting. But I think it's important not to mix them up because it might risk us missing the real plot here. Which is, one is, have we applied the different standard of rule of law throughout this country over the course of 2020? Absolutely, we did. Antifa, BLM, you name it. If you have a left-wing ideology, it was a mostly peaceful protest, you ignore it. That's a glaring point and deserves to be called out. And I think that there can be no justice with two standards of the rule of law based on your political ideology. I think, to be clear, what happened on January 6th was not some small joke. This was significant in terms of the number of people, in terms of, some of the video footage the mainstream media picked out. But I think what's significant about it is we don't know what actually caused those people to act the way they did. Was it really the government instigating something that otherwise didn't exist, using it as a deflection to achieve a national security state's revival that had otherwise receded over the course of 20 years since the post-9/11 period? And so maybe I've just told you what I actually think is going on here. But that's what I think the facts suggest, is there was a reason for these people to not only get Donald Trump out of office, but to discredit this, to relegate this line of thinking, the movement behind him, to the dustbins of history. And this was the way to do it. So I think that there was a lot of depth to this, and it wasn't just that, these are two different standards, two different bad things, yes. But this was, I think, a very serious forethought exercise in accomplishing something. And unless we see through it, first step when you see a problem is to name it. Unless we do that, they are going to accomplish what they set out to accomplish. That's what I believe.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.